Hey everyone, I'm Chris with Createx Colors, and we are here in the booth today to kind of do a prequel to even before you start painting. So this is kind of to get you started before you even start mixing paint. Just some things, we got a lot of questions in terms of tech of, we'll start with air compressors in terms of what air compressor, what do I need to really start. So this is kind of a brief kind of soup to nuts overview. We won't get too technical, but we'll give you some pointers on really what it is you need to really start that painting process. So first things first, you need an air compressor. And this is a question that comes up quite a bit, and there's some kind of confusion on the differences between air pressure and volume, volume being the CFM. It's a rating of basically it means cubic feet per minute. So that is how much air that compressor is giving you. We'll cut real quick, we'll show you a picture of the compressor that we have, because that's another question that we get. And this is kind of overkill for the home painter, for the hobbyist. It's a great setup. It's a 10 horsepower, 120 gallon monster air compressor. But we have a complete facility here, so we got a lot of stuff going on, and it works perfectly for us. This is what you'd find in basically a refinished shop. For the home painter, the hobbyist, you're going to want an air compressor that's at least a 1/4 horsepower or a 1/5 horsepower compressor motor. With an air tank. I always recommend something that has a tank because you're going to get a little more volume out of that. There's a lot of different companies out there that make the little diaphragm ones that are almost generally the same as like what you'd use to put air in your tires, and you're going to burn those out. You're going to get sick and tired of them. So if you're going to make the investment, get something that will give you at least 1 to 2 CFM. And that's very low on the rating, but that's going to be perfect for an airbrush. An airbrush is not really thirsty in terms of that volume of air. If you're going to step up to something, and really in this video we're not going to talk about spray guns or anything like that, but we will kind of cover the largest minigun that I tend to use a lot. This is the Iwata, the LPH80. And with a certain air cap, it's a bigger air cap, the E4 air cap, this will use just over 2 CFM. So keep that in mind. If you're going to make the investment, you're going to buy something, get a little bit larger capacity, and you're going to be happy with it. And you're going to get something that's quality, it's going to last, you're not going to burn it out, and you're not going to get sick of not having enough air. So you're always better off having a little bit more volume, a little more air than anything else. So that's kind of that in its own, just the largest of what we're going to discuss. Everything else, smaller airbrush is just a general. This is an Eclipse CS, this is kind of the workhorse. All the way up to the TH2, the new TH2 that they re-released. This is going to perform well with a smaller air compressor, so you don't need that thirsty volume of air. So that's one of the common misconceptions too, is the difference between CFM and air pressure. Everybody says, oh, well, my compressor goes up to 100 PSI or 120. That doesn't really mean anything, because what it is how fast can it recover to maintain that airflow. So CFM is what you guys want to pay attention to when you're pricing or looking and choosing the compressor. So on from there, compressor, now you need an airline. So the basic airlines, these are going to thread right onto your airbrush. Right? There's a little O-ring in here, rubber O-ring. You finger tighten that. You don't want to over tighten it because you'll crush it and actually cause leaks. But that's the connection on your airbrush. You can also, on the other end of this, I have a quick disconnect. So if you want to use one airline and you have multiple airbrushes, you get a bunch of these fittings. And you can find these online. Iwata carries them, and a lot of different suppliers carry them. These are the quick connects. So basically what you're going to do is just click that on your airbrush. So now you can change airbrushes. You don't have to turn off your airline, because if this was open, if you were to disconnect this, you'd be blowing air out of the end of the hose. So this kind of is nice when you pull that off, it shuts it off, you can switch to another airbrush. So even if you're going to clean it or whatever, you're stopping for a minute, you have this capability. It makes it a lot easier. So on the other end, this is going to go not directly to your compressor, but you're going to want to run a regulator. Some compressors have a regulator on it, and that's great. If your compressor is far away from you, you're going to want to have a line going to a regulator closer to you. And the reasoning behind that is now you have an adjustment right where you're working, in your workspace, that you can adjust air pressure depending on the viscosity of your paint or what it is you're spraying, or even just changing airbrushes. So a nice simple regulator. This one has a built-in moisture trap, which is also kind of imperative that you use, something that's key. You're always going to get a little bit of moisture when you're compressing air. So this is a great little thing that's right kind of close to you, point of use, that's always going to have like a visual in terms of water. You just push the bottom of this and it releases the water, and it's going to keep your airline nice and clean. So when you're running that, a little bit higher air pressure on your compressor, maybe 10 psi more than what you have at the regulator, but it's going to give you a nice steady stream, so it gives you a little more adjustment on where you are. And you always want this regulated close to you, so you get the least amount of pressure drop. What we mean by that is as it comes from the compressor, you get a little static loss in terms of air pressure, so you want that consistent, right close to you. So moving on from that, we're going to talk about kind of some prep, some surface prep real quick, and then we'll move on to kind of some supplies that we kind of recommend and kind of why we do that. So the most general, the most basic, right, Scotch-Brite pads. These are Scotch-Brite pads, you use scuff pads, we refer to it a lot in the industry. This is red, or the maroon, and this is gray. The maroon is right around a 320 scratch in terms of the grit, and the gray is right maybe 400 to 500, right? So these are great tools in terms of surface preparation. If you're not doing anything in terms of body work, you don't really need to have all kinds of different crazy sandpaper, but you do need a means of scuffing. And what we mean by that is knocking the shine off the surface that you're working on. So if you're working on panels, like the powder coated panels, plastics, helmets, anything like that, you're gonna want, or an OEM kind of finish, a base finish, right? You wanna sand or scuff that surface to flatten it, to dull it down so you have adhesion. Our paints stick fantastic to just about anything, but that raw finish is not what you're going to want to paint over. You're always going to want to knock that surface down in terms of that shine and knock that shine off so you get a nice tooth for the paint to bite to. So like I said, these are the two standards. Other than that, basically surface, if it's a OEM, what we call finish, like a clear coated finish, right around 600 grit is kind of the standard. And you don't want to go any lower than 400. So moving on from that, from prep, when you're done prepping something, you're going to want to wipe it off and you're going to clean it basically. So I have in front of me here, this is a PPG product that we use here all the time. I have two different cleaners, right? I have a solvent-based cleaner and I have a water-based cleaner. What I have right here is a water-based cleaner. Water-based will take off water-based contamination, and solvent will take off solvent-based contamination. So these are basically the least aggressive solvents right before you start painting. There's no reason to have really heavy aggressive solvents because it's just going to cause more problems. So the solvent that I use is a PPG SX320, and it is a very mild solvent-based pre-clean. And this is their SX394, their water-based version. And what this is also kind of handy with, and when you guys are painting plastics or something that may create static electricity, the water in this will also kind of help neutralize that, to get rid of that static charge so you don't have everything kind of sticking to it. So one thing I want to touch on, when you are painting, you can use this before you start to paint, right before your project. When you begin painting, now remind you're using water-based paints, you do not want to wipe your paint with a water-based cleaner once you begin that process, because you are going to soften that paint. This is a water-based, it's a water-based paint. This is kind of like wiping something with that reducer. If you took the same reducer that you're using in your paint, it's going to smear it. So once you start painting, solvent-based, but again, mild solvent-based, you don't need something super aggressive. There's a bunch of different varieties out there. We recommend PPG, but it's totally up to you. There's a lot of product out there. So after you wipe that down with a clean, lint-free towel, so there's kind of wipes out. You can use paper towels, but keep in mind now you kind of have the dust that's left behind, the fuzziness from those paper towels are really not designed for like pre-painting wipes. So there's a couple different companies that manufacture these. You can get these from auto parts stores. These are just low lint pre-paint towels. So use that with your cleaner. And the last thing before you actually start the paint is a tack rag, right? So I have two different versions here. This is kind of like the old school, kind of the OG solvent kind of based tack rag. Is very, very popular, very common. You can find these all over the place. And these are a product from Gerson. It's a great company. They make a bunch of different products, but these are water-based, waterborne specific tack rags. So they're synthetic. There's no silicones, there's no kind of solvents or adhesives in here that are going to mess with the water-based paint, but they also, that translates to them working very well with solvent-based systems as well. So if I was going to choose one, I would recommend these because it kind of does both. Now you can use these guys on water-based paints, but just one tip or one trick would be, once you open this out of the package, kind of open it up, unfold it, and let it breathe for about 5 to 10 minutes so that any of the solvents that are in here, they're a little more aggressive than the waterborne, water-based tack rags, kind of evaporate. So you're not taking that and wiping it onto you. And again, when you use these, It is, a tack rag is just like a light wipe over the top. You're not trying to dig into anything, because what you will do is actually transfer some of that stickiness that's designed to just pull dust. And that's what these are trying to do. All you're trying to do is just kind of remove dust, surface contamination with these. So it's not actually like a wipe. So once you're ready to go and you have a clean surface to work on, you got to mix your paint. So there's a variety of different products out there. These are from Easy Mix. This is what we use here. You can get them in different sizes. So we have tiny little guys all the way up to, these are half a quart, 16 ounces, and you can get up to gallon. And there's so many different varieties. So this is something that's great because it has some graduations on there. So we're always talking about ratios, 10% or 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, stuff like that. These are right on the cup. It just simplifies everything, and it makes it really easy, kind of right in your face, and consistent. So consistency is key when you're trying to paint and have consistent results. So these are great products. Again, there's so many different varieties out there, but this is something that's kind of indispensable. And because these are pretty heavy-duty plastic and solvent resistant, you can reuse these, because again, this is water-based paint, so there's no reason that unless you let it dry up in here, but you can use these time and time again until they really start to get contaminated, and then it's not that big of a deal to toss them and get fresh ones. So the other thing in terms of mixing cups is, if you guys are familiar, this is a cool system that we use, the PPS system. This is the 3M PPS 2.0 system. It is a kind of a modular cup, liner, and lid system. So these, you can't really use these on an airbrush, but when you're getting to, again, this is kind of a large capacity as well, when you're using the spray gun, so even a minigun. And we actually have some adapters that we made that work with a different airbrush, the kind of spec one-off stuff, but these work fantastic. So you get the adapter that goes on this cup, or on the gun, and this just spins right on. And this is indispensable if you're doing color changes a lot, or you want to mix paint and you can save it. There's actually plugs that you can get that once you take this off, you can cap this. And actually there's lids for the mixing cups as well. One thing I want to touch on is that's really designed for short-term storage. You don't want to mix your paint here and then leave this for months, because it is going to eventually dry up. These aren't like airtight. They're airtight enough that if you're going to come back tomorrow, or if you're going to go to lunch and grab something to eat, you could cap this off and do something. That's also something too, is when you're mixing your paint in your cups, if you're going to go and spray, try not to leave these just sitting out on the bench, because again, this is an air dry paint. So you'll start to get a little bit of crust at the top, or a little bit of film. It starts to skin over, and the last thing you want to do is pour that back into your gun or your airbrush, and then you're getting spitting and little issues. So try to keep these closed up, or at least keep them from drying out. So one more thing, I know I'm kind of jumping around, but one more thing I want to touch on with these is one of the products that we have, and I'm really not going to talk about a lot of stuff, but our Hot Rod Sparkle, and I talk about this quite a bit in other videos that we do use the Hot Rod Sparkle in. It is a pearl effect flake. It's a large pearl flake, and built in, that's kind of the other thing, convenient with these, built into these lids is a strainer system, and that's actually something I'll talk about next, is straining your paint. But these have a built-in strainer. Now these are 200 micron strainers, so they're pretty universal in terms of straining your paint. The problem is the Hot Rod Sparkle will get hung up in there. So if you're spraying and you're like, well, why is nothing happening? The flake is actually larger than that mesh, and it gets hung up inside. So if you are spraying, and that's the only colors that the Hot Rod Sparkle line of colors, the Wicked Hot Rod Sparkles, you're going to want to pull that liner right out and use the cup just as a normal cup without that liner. There's a little tab on there. You just give it a yank and yank that out. And actually you could save these as well and put them aside for just Hot Rod Sparkles. And sometimes that's what I do, so I don't have to keep tossing these lids once I'm done. So that, if you're not using the PPS system, or if you're doing airbrush work and you don't need the PPS system, these are strainers. We get a lot of questions on what size strainer. These are another product from Gerson. These are 190 micron. So this is a 190 mesh strainer, and that is perfect across the board with our paints. Again, the Hot Rod Sparkle is not going to pass through this, but everything else will. All of our cosmics, our pearl flakes, all of our pearls and metallics, even our aluminums will all go through these strainers, no problem. And it's great to just strain your paint. It's cheap insurance to make sure you don't have any leftover paint in the cap or in the lid if you leave it open. So it's cheap insurance to ensure a quality finish. So 190 micron is kind of what we recommend across the board. So once you're done painting with your project, right, you have to clean up. So again, we have a product, A lot of times if I'm in between color changes or doing just like a light clean, the reducer that you're using for your paint will work as the cleaner. So if I'm using that reducer, that 4011 reducer, that's kind of our go-to, it works fine as a cleaner to flush between, or even just hot water, warm water is a great way to clean out your airbrush in between color changes or in between sessions. But for that final end of the day when I'm done, you really want to clean out your airbrush, your spray gun, whatever, because the water-based paint actually really does bite into that more than a solvent-based paint would. So we have a product called Restore. And this is a great cleaner to soak your parts in. Now, if you do have soft plastic parts, you're not going to want to let these really sit overnight. But anything else that's coated, like the needles, the nozzles, your air caps, all that, the kind of the guts from the spray gun forward, where your fluid passage is, all the way to the front of this, let that soak for even just an hour or two, and you can just rinse that out with hot water, warm water afterwards. There's all kinds of different brushes and little needle cleaners that you can just for the tips and the nozzles. These are just kind of universal. You can find these all over any kind of art supply stores. So we have like little wire brushes or little, these are nylon actually, just to clean out the tips and like the passages for your airbrush. And then we have smaller ones that are almost like, actually like needles themselves that are real tiny. And these help just clean out the air cap passages or the very small tips that you guys have in your airbrushes, and just a general cleaning brush. So warm water after you soak it in the Restore, and it's going to break down that paint, anything left behind. And again, sometimes the biggest problems that you can have when you're painting, if you're saying, oh, something's spitting or it's not moving just right, it could be just a dirty airbrush. So cleaning your equipment, it's just going to make your life that much easier. And that pretty much wraps this up. I think for more information really on actual painting and the paint process, you can go to creatextech.com and you can check out the technical data sheets for our Wicked Colors and all our YouTube videos on our YouTube channel, createxcolors.go. I'm Chris Arpin for Createx Colors, and we'll see you guys next time.